The first thing Commander Kyle Varen learned about humanity was that humans were very good at looking harmless. They had no claws, no natural armor, no venom, no fangs large enough to impress a predator, and no biological weapon that could be seen from across a room. Their bodies looked almost fragile compared with the towering species that dominated the Galactic Coalition. That was why the Coalition had made the same mistake every empire eventually made when it encountered humanity. It measured the human body instead of measuring what the human body had survived. Kyle learned that lesson on the morning the war began. The planet beneath his cruiser was called Nareth, a world of black deserts, violent storms, and continents fractured by ancient volcanic scars. It had once been considered uninhabitable even by species that had colonized neutron moon environments. The gravity was brutal. The atmosphere was chemically unstable. Temperatures could fall below freezing before sunrise and climb high enough by afternoon to kill an unprotected organism within minutes. Nareth had no gentle seasons. It had no peaceful oceans. Its jungles contained organisms that could digest metal. Its deserts moved like oceans whenever the planetary winds accelerated. And beneath everything lived creatures that had evolved over millions of years with one simple rule. Anything that could be eaten eventually would be. Humanity had established a colony there anyway. Kale stood inside the command chamber of the Coalition dreadnought Vorak, staring at the tactical display as thousands of red symbols moved across the planetary surface. He was a Tharun, a species built for war. His people stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, carried dense bone structures beneath layered natural plating, and had 4 arms designed originally for hunting in the deep caverns of their homeworld. The Galactic Coalition had once considered the Tharun one of the most dangerous biological species in known space. Kyle had always believed that reputation was deserved, until he studied the humans. "They are retreating," said Lieutenant Serac from the navigation station. His voice carried the satisfaction of a predator watching prey corner itself. "The human settlements along the eastern continent have abandoned their outer perimeter. Their defensive grid is collapsing." Kale narrowed his eyes. "How many civilian ships have left the planet?" "None." Kale turned slowly. "None? Not one." The command chamber became quieter. On the tactical display, thousands of human life signs remained inside the colony's central territories. Their orbital elevators were still active. Their industrial facilities were still producing. Their communication network was broadcasting evacuation instructions, but no evacuation was actually occurring. That made no sense. Kyle had studied human military behavior for 6 months. Humans withdrew when they were outnumbered. They abandoned positions when those positions became strategically useless. They surrendered when the cost of resistance exceeded the value of the objective. At least that was what the Coalition analysts believed. "Perhaps they are trapped," Lieutenant Serac suggested. Kale watched the display for several seconds. "No," he said. The lieutenant looked at him. "They are waiting." At that exact moment, the tactical screen changed. A human transmission had entered the system. No dramatic declaration appeared. No threat. No demand for surrender. Only a voice. "My name is Colonel Mara Kess." The human woman appeared on the central display. She wore a simple combat uniform covered in dust. One side of her face was bruised, and there was dried blood near her temple. Behind her stood a damaged human command bunker. Emergency lights flashed across the walls. Kyle expected fear. There was none. "You have surrounded 3 million civilians," she said. "You have destroyed our orbital defense platforms, cut our communications with the outer colonies, and occupied every major spaceport." She paused. "So I assume you believe you've won." The Coalition officers laughed. Kale did not. Mara Kess leaned closer to the camera. "You haven't." The transmission ended. A few seconds later, another officer laughed. "Primitive intimidation." Kale looked at the tactical map again. "Launch the planetary assault." The order went out. Thousands of Coalition landing craft descended through the violet clouds of Nareth. Heavy armor struck the surface. Siege machines deployed. Infantry divisions advanced toward the human defensive zones. The Coalition had expected resistance. What they found instead was silence. The first human trench line was empty. The second was empty. The third was empty. Then the coalition army crossed the old mining valley. The ground exploded, not once, not twice, everywhere. Entire columns disappeared beneath carefully prepared charges. Armored vehicles were thrown sideways. Infantry formations broke apart. Communications failed as electromagnetic pulses rolled across the valley. Before the coalition could reorganize, human artillery began firing from positions that had not existed 5 minutes earlier. Kyle watched the battlefield through the command display. "They buried the weapons," Serac whispered. "No," Kyle replied. He zoomed the image. "They buried the battlefield." The humans had not prepared a defensive line. They had prepared the entire continent. Every abandoned settlement, every collapsed mine, every dry riverbed, every canyon, every ruined industrial complex had been converted into part of a massive interconnected trap. The coalition had not invaded a human colony. It had walked into a weapon. And somewhere beneath the surface, Colonel Mara Kess watched the enemy advance exactly where she had predicted they would. She looked at the officer beside her. "How long?" 6 hours until their main fleet lands. Mara nodded. "Good." The officer stared at her. "Good?" She looked toward the ceiling as another explosion shook the bunker. "They still think this is an invasion." Her expression hardened. "It isn't." She turned toward the command table. "It's bait." The ground battle continued for another 3 hours. Coalition forces pushed deeper into the continent, believing they were crushing human resistance. Every time they took a new position, they found the humans had already left. Every time they secured a supply route, they discovered it had been mined. Every time they thought they were advancing, they were really being herded. Kyle understood the pattern before anyone else. Lieutenant Serac approached him cautiously. "Commander, our ground forces have taken significant casualties. The humans are retreating toward the capital city. We can corner them there." "Are they retreating?" Kyle asked. "Or are they withdrawing?" Serac hesitated. "What is the difference?" Kyle turned his gaze from the display. "Retreat is what you do when you are losing. Withdrawal is what you do when you want the enemy to follow you." He pointed at the tactical map. "They are not running from us." He traced a line across the continent with one clawed finger. "They are leading us." Serac studied the display. "But why would they want us to follow?" Kale stared at the map for a long moment. "Because they want us exactly where they can see us." On the surface, Colonel Mara Kess was still alive. That was the first thing the coalition discovered when their intelligence network managed to re-establish communication with the human colony's internal systems. Colonel Kess had not evacuated. She had not hidden in a secure bunker. She had not even stayed in one place. She was moving constantly across the battlefield, appearing at different locations every few hours, coordinating her forces with ruthless efficiency. The second thing they discovered was that Colonel Kess had been expecting them, not just expecting them. She had been planning for them, for years. Her files, scattered across the ruined human infrastructure, contained detailed analyses of coalition military doctrine, assault patterns, and supply logistics. She had studied every war the coalition had fought. She had studied how coalition commanders thought, how they planned their campaigns, and how they responded to resistance. She knew exactly how Kale would deploy his forces, and she had built her defenses accordingly. "Commander," Serac said from the communications station, "we have received an intelligence report from the surface. The humans are using local materials to construct weapons." "What kind of materials?" Kyle asked. The lieutenant hesitated. "Everything." Kale turned. "Everything?" "Everything," Serac confirmed. "Their weapons are being manufactured from scrap metal, desert sand, atmospheric compounds, organic matter, and what appears to be biological waste. They are processing local resources into explosives that a radar analysts cannot explain." Kale stared at him. "How is that possible?" "Our analysts do not know." Kale moved to the navigation station. "How long would it take our own forces to manufacture weapons from local materials?" Serac checked the calculations. "Under normal conditions, several days, possibly longer. The local environment is too unstable for standard manufacturing processes, but the humans are doing it faster." "Yes, Commander." Kyle's expression tightened. Why? Serac had no answer. Why had humanity chosen this planet? That was the question Kale could not escape. Nareth was a death world. Everything about it was hostile. The atmosphere was toxic. The gravity was crushing. The local fauna was relentless. The local flora was worse. Humans had no biological adaptation to survive here. They could not digest local food. They could not breathe local air. They could not endure the ultraviolet radiation that bathed the surface every morning. And yet they had built a colony. They had constructed cities, factories, orbital elevators, and underground habitats. They had extracted resources from the ground and turned them into technology. They had established trade routes with distant colonies and imported anything they could not produce themselves. But they had also left traces of something else, something Kale could not identify. "Commander," the intelligence officer said, "our analysts have discovered something." Kale looked up. What? The human colony contained structures that appear to predate their arrival. Kale's 4 hands flexed involuntarily. "Explain." "The structures are built into the planet's crust. They are not part of the current colony. They are far older. Our analysts believe they were constructed by some previous civilization." Kale stared at the display. "Who?" The intelligence officer shook his head. "We do not know. But we believe the humans came here specifically to find these structures. They were not just building a colony, they were excavating something. Something important." Kyle felt a chill run down his armored spine. "What is it?" "We do not know." On the surface, Colonel Mara Kess had just received the same report. She had known about the structures for years. She had known what was buried beneath Nareth's surface, and she had used that knowledge to plan every detail of the defense. The Coalition did not know what they were walking into. They did not know that every human settlement, every mining operation, and every industrial facility had been built not just to support the colony, but to conceal what was really happening here. They thought they were invading a human world. But the humans were not the ones who built this place, and something else was still down there. Something that had been waiting a very long time, something that was now beginning to wake up. Kale stared at the tactical display as the last Coalition landing craft deployed to the surface. His fleet had already lost thousands of soldiers. His ground forces were bogged down in urban combat. His supply lines were being cut by human raiders operating in the desert wastelands. But none of that concerned him as much as the reports coming from the geologists. "Commander," the intelligence officer said, "our analysts have detected seismic activity beneath the surface." "What kind of seismic activity?" "They believe it is artificial." Kale's blood went cold. "Artificial?" "Yes, Commander. The patterns do not match natural tectonic movement. Something is moving beneath the crust, something large." "How large?" The officer looked at the data. "We cannot accurately measure it, but the seismic waves suggest that whatever is down there is significantly larger than our dreadnought." Kale felt his world tilt beneath his feet. "Why did the humans settle here?" he asked quietly. The officer hesitated. "I do not know, Commander." Kyle turned toward the display. "They settled here because they were looking for something," he said, "and they found it." He paused. "But they were not trying to use it against us." He looked at the tactical map. They were trying to protect it. The mining tunnels beneath Nareth's surface stretched for thousands of kilometers. They had been created by machines that no one in the Galactic Coalition had ever seen. They followed patterns that made no sense. They were reinforced with materials that resisted analysis. They connected to chambers that appeared to have no entrances and no exits. And in the deepest of those chambers, something dark and ancient rested. It had been sleeping for millions of years. But now, with the vibrations of war reaching into its slumber, it began to stir. The humans had known it was there. They had built their colony on top of it for a reason. They had prepared their defenses for a reason. They had stayed on this planet, endured its horrors, and built their civilization on its surface for a reason. They were not defending themselves. They were guarding something else, something that was about to wake up. And when it did, Kale realized with terror, the Coalition would be blamed, not the humans. The Coalition. They had started the war. They had invaded this planet, They had triggered the seismic disturbances that were disturbing the ancient thing below. And now, the ancient thing was angry. Kale looked at the tactical display. His officers were still celebrating their advance. His soldiers were still fighting through the city streets. His ships were still preparing for the final bombardment. But he knew that none of it mattered. The humans had won before the first shot was fired, and he had walked right into their trap. "Commander," Serac said, "we are receiving another transmission from Colonel Kess." Kale nodded slowly. "Put it through." The human woman appeared on the display again. Her face was still bruised, still covered in dust. "Commander Kale," she said, "I assume you are starting to understand." He did not answer. "This planet is not ours," she continued. "But it is not yours either. We are just visitors. We came here because we found something we should have left alone." She paused. "But we could not leave it alone. We knew that someone else would find it eventually, someone like you, and we could not let that happen." She smiled. "So we stayed here. We built our colony. We prepared our defenses. We waited. And you came, just like we knew you would." Kale's hands trembled. "What did you find down there?" he asked. Mara Kess looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Commander," she said quietly, "you do not want to know." The transmission ended, and beneath Nareth's surface, the ancient thing opened one eye. The Coalition fleet had conquered 27 civilizations. It had destroyed planets that refused surrender. It had erased entire military cultures from history. Its admirals had learned to calculate victory before the first shot was fired. That confidence lasted exactly 11 hours on Nareth. By the 12th hour, the Coalition had lost more than 300,000 soldiers. By the 15th, 74 armored divisions had vanished. By the 18th, 3 orbital supply platforms had been destroyed. And by the 20th hour, Admiral Vorik finally understood the problem. "The humans aren't defending their colony," he said. His officers stood around the tactical table in silence. Vorik pointed toward the planetary display. "They are shaping our movement." Every Red Coalition formation was being pushed toward specific regions. Every human attack appeared designed not to destroy the enemy immediately, but to force it toward another position. The humans were giving ground deliberately. They were hurting the invasion force. "Why?" asked one of the generals. Vorik stared at the map. "Because they don't want us here." He highlighted the northern continent. "They want us there." The realization came too late. The northern continent contained the largest human industrial complex on Nareth. Factories, shipyards, weapons facilities, fuel reserves. It was the most valuable target on the planet. The Coalition changed direction, exactly as Mara Kess expected. The human commander stood inside a mountain bunker more than 4 kilometers underground. Around her, technicians worked without speaking. They had been awake for 36 hours. Some had bloodshot eyes. Others had burns on their hands. Nobody complained. A young communications officer approached. "Colonel, the Coalition fleet has taken the northern corridor." Mara looked at the display. "How many?" 800,000 ground troops, 12 heavy divisions, 4 orbital assault groups. She nodded. "Excellent." The officer hesitated. "Colonel, tell everyone to prepare for evacuation." Mara looked at him. "No." She touched the command interface. The mountain began to shake. Across the northern continent, the ground opened. Human engineers had spent years constructing underground tunnels beneath Nareth. The Coalition had mistaken them for mining operations. They were not. They were launch tubes. The first human missiles erupted from the planet. Then another 1,000. Then another. The sky became a field of fire. Coalition ships attempted to intercept them, but the missiles did not travel in predictable trajectories. Some accelerated upward. Others disappeared beneath the atmosphere and emerged from different directions. Several entered orbit and released swarms of smaller autonomous weapons. The Coalition fleet broke formation. That was when the human fighters appeared. Not hundreds, thousands. They had been hiding beneath the planet's surface. Their engines ignited simultaneously. The sky over Nareth turned white. "Where did they get all those ships?" someone whispered. Vorik didn't answer. The truth was worse than the question. The humans had never stopped building. Every time the coalition believed it had destroyed a factory, another one emerged somewhere else. Every time a shipyard was bombed, the humans rebuilt it underground. Every time the coalition occupied a city, the population disappeared into tunnels and returned somewhere else. The humans were not fighting like an empire. They were fighting like an organism. Cut one part away, and another part continued moving. Then Mara Kess received the message she had been waiting for. Colonel. The communications officer's voice was trembling. Enemy fleet has entered low orbit. Mara looked at the screen. How many? All of them. She smiled. Then they finally made the mistake. The officer stared at her. What mistake? Mara turned toward the main display. They came down to kill us. She activated the final command. Every human orbital platform around Nareth powered up. The coalition had believed those platforms were damaged. They weren't. They had been pretending. A massive electromagnetic field spread around the planet. Coalition ships lost their engines. One by one, thousands of vessels became trapped in orbit. The human fleet accelerated, and then the first boarding ships launched. HFY was no longer watching the battle from a safe distance. His cruiser had been damaged. Its shields were failing. The human fleet was everywhere. He watched a human boarding vessel attach itself to the hull. They're coming aboard, Sarek said. Kale stood. How many? The sensor officer checked the reading. 30. Kale almost laughed. 30 humans against a cruiser carrying 12,000 coalition soldiers. Then the lights went out. A second later, the ship's internal alarms began screaming. Kale drew his weapon. Prepare every soldier. The first explosion came from the lower decks, then another, then 5 at once. The coalition troops moved toward the boarding zones. They expected an invasion. Instead, the doors opened. A human soldier walked through. She was small compared with the Tharun. No armor heavy enough to stop a direct attack. No claws, no natural weapons, just a rifle. She raised it. The corridor erupted in gunfire. And for the first time in his life, Kale understood something terrifying. The humans had not come aboard to defeat the coalition. They had come aboard because they were willing to fight inside the enemy's own ship. The human soldier moved through the corridor like she had been born there. Every step was calculated. Every shot was precise. She did not hesitate when coalition soldiers appeared. She did not flinch when return fire came close. She simply kept moving forward. Kale watched through the internal security feed as his soldiers fell. They outnumbered the humans by hundreds. They had superior weapons. They had natural armor. But somehow, none of that mattered. The humans were not trying to hold positions. They were not trying to secure strategic objectives. They were just killing. Every coalition soldier they encountered, every officer, every technician, every Marine. They did not take prisoners. They did not accept surrender. They simply advanced through the ship, and anyone who stood in their path died. Commander, Sarek said, his voice barely controlled. They are approaching the command deck. Kyle turned. How many are left? 28. Kyle stared at him. 28? Yes, Commander. 2 of their soldiers have been killed. The remaining 28 continue toward us. Kyle's hands tightened on his weapon. He looked at the officers around him. There were 40 of them on the command deck, all of them armed, all of them trained, all of them prepared to fight. But he knew. Somehow, he knew that was not enough. Secure the doors, he ordered. The doors to the command deck slammed shut. Reinforced plating slid into place, locking mechanisms engaged. Kyle watched the security feed as the human soldiers approached. They did not slow down. They did not attempt to find another route. They simply walked toward the doors. One of them produced a small device. She attached it to the plating. A moment later, the doors exploded inward. Kale raised his weapon. Fire! The command deck became a battlefield. Plasma bolts filled the air. The Tharun officers fired in disciplined patterns, coordinated volleys designed to overwhelm any opposition. But the humans did not stay in one place. They moved through the smoke and debris, appearing and disappearing, their own weapons flashing with deadly accuracy. Kale watched as his officers fell one by one. He watched as the humans advanced through the chaos. He watched as they reached his position, and then he saw the human commander. She was not among the boarding party. She was standing in the doorway, watching the battle with cold, calculating eyes. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Then she turned and walked away. Kale struggled to understand. Why was she leaving? Why was she not coming to kill him herself? The answer came a moment later when another human soldier stepped in front of him. She was younger than the others, maybe 20 years old. Her face was covered in dust and sweat. Her rifle was raised. "I am Commander Kale Veyran," he said. "I am the commanding officer of this vessel." The young human soldier did not respond. "You cannot kill me without cause," he continued. "There are protocols. There are rules of war. I demand you take me as a prisoner." The young human soldier tilted her head slightly. Then she fired. The shot struck Kale's shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, his weapon clattering away from him. The soldier walked over to him and looked down. "Protocols," she said quietly. "Rules of war." She put the barrel of her rifle against his forehead. "You came to our home to kill us." She pulled the trigger. The weapon clicked. Empty. Kyle waited for death. It did not come. The young soldier looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached down and grabbed him by the throat. "You are going to live," she said. "You are going to watch everything we do. And then you are going to tell your people what happens to anyone who comes to our world." She released him and stepped back. A moment later, she was gone. The battle for the ship continued for another 2 hours. When it was over, the coalition had lost the cruiser. The human soldiers had retreated back to their boarding vessels. They took no prisoners. They left no survivors except Kyle. He lay on the command deck, bleeding from his wounds, staring at the ceiling as the human fleet withdrew. He did not understand why they had let him live. He did not understand why they had not killed him. He did not understand the way they fought or the way they thought. But he understood one thing. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to send a message, and that message was clear. On the surface, Mara Kess watched the battle from her bunker. The coalition fleet was broken. Its supply lines were cut. Its ground forces were surrounded. Its ships were trapped in orbit. The war was not over yet, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. "Colonel," her communications officer said, "we have received reports from all sectors. The coalition is retreating from Nareth." Mara nodded. "Good. What are your orders?" Mara looked at the display. She thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the lives lost. She thought about the world that had wanted them dead. And she thought about the ancient thing that was still sleeping beneath the surface. "We are not done," she said. "The coalition will come back. They will send more ships. They will send more soldiers. They will try again. But that is exactly what we need." The officer stared at her. "Colonel?" Mara turned to him. "We need them to come back. We need them to keep coming back. We need them to believe that this planet is worth conquering." "Why?" She smiled. "Because the more they come, the more they will learn to fear us. And when they fear us enough, they will leave us alone forever." The officer nodded slowly. He did not understand, but he did not need to. He had seen what humans were capable of on this planet. He had seen what they had done to the coalition. He had no doubt that they could do it again. And he knew, deep down, that the coalition had made a terrible mistake. It had invaded a world that wanted nothing but to be left alone. That was the last thought on Kale's mind as he lay bleeding in the wrecked command deck. His people had come to Nareth to conquer. They had believed they were the hunters, but they had been the prey all along. The humans had let them come. They had let them land. They had let them advance. And then they had destroyed them. He closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance he heard explosions. He heard gunfire. He heard the sounds of war. But he also heard something else. Something beneath it all. A low rumbling sound. A sound that seemed to come from the planet itself. The humans had won. But Kale realized that was not the real victory. The real victory was something else. Something he could not understand. Something that was still sleeping beneath the surface. The war was over. But something much worse was coming. The battle spread from the planet to the ships. from the ships to the stations, and from the stations into the cities. Nareth became a war zone measured not in kilometers, but in hours. Human forces moved through underground tunnels while coalition armies controlled the surface. Coalition ships dominated orbit while human fighters attacked from hidden launch sites. Neither side could achieve a decisive victory. The fighting had become something else entirely. It was no longer a campaign with clear objectives and measurable goals. It was chaos given form. Every hour brought new horrors. Every minute claimed more lives. The humans had stopped trying to hold territory. They had started making the enemy pay for every inch of ground they took, and the coalition, for all its superior technology and overwhelming numbers, could not seem to stop them. Then the coalition made its final move. Admiral Vorik ordered the destruction of the southern continent. "Fire the planetary lances," he commanded. The order shocked even his own officers. The planetary lances were not ordinary weapons. They were designed to penetrate atmospheres and ignite entire regions. The coalition had used them against rebellious worlds before, but never against a populated continent, never against millions of civilians. The southern continent contained more than 6 million human civilians. Vorik did not care. If they refused to surrender, he said, remove the planet beneath them. The weapons fired. Mara Kess watched the streaks of light descend from orbit. Her command center went silent. Everyone stopped working. Everyone stared at the displays. The lances were coming down like the fingers of some ancient god, reaching through the atmosphere with impossible speed and terrible purpose. "Impact in 4 minutes," someone said. Mara closed her eyes. For the first time since the war began, she looked tired. Not afraid. Tired. The weight of everything she had done, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had asked her people to endure, pressed down on her like the gravity of Nareth itself. She had known this moment might come. She had prepared for it, but knowing and facing were two different things. Then she opened her eyes. "Send the message," she said. The communications officer looked confused. To whom? Everyone. A transmission spread across Nareth, then beyond Nareth, then into coalition space. Mara Kess appeared on every available screen, every human device, every coalition receiver, every orbital relay. Her face was bruised and bloodied. Her uniform was torn. Her voice was steady. "You came here because you thought humans were weak." The image behind her showed the burning skies of Nareth. "You thought our lack of claws meant we could not fight." A pause. "You thought our lack of armor meant we could not survive." Another pause. "You thought because we could lose battles, we could be defeated." Mara looked directly into the camera. "You made the oldest mistake in human history." Her expression hardened. "You confused survival with surrender." The transmission ended. Something unexpected happened. Coalition soldiers began receiving human messages on their personal devices. Not threats, not propaganda. Coordinates, evacuation routes, names of civilians trapped in cities. Human soldiers were offering enemy troops safe corridors if they refused to fire, if they chose to save themselves instead of following orders. The coalition command structure began collapsing, because now the soldiers had to make a choice: obey the admirals or survive. Thousands surrendered, then tens of thousands, then entire units. Vorik ordered executions for deserters. That only made things worse. Within hours, coalition troops began turning their weapons against their own commanders. The war was no longer human versus alien. It had become a battle over whether the coalition itself would survive. Kale Varen stood inside the damaged command chamber of his cruiser and watched the chaos. The tactical display showed his fleet fragmenting, ships turning on each other, soldiers refusing orders, admirals shouting commands that nobody followed. The war had become a nightmare, and he was trapped at the center of it. Sarak approached him. "Commander." Kyle looked at him. "The human boarding team has reached the bridge." Kyle slowly lowered his weapon. "How many?" "7. He almost smiled. 7. Against the bridge crew of a coalition cruiser, against him. 7 humans had fought their way through thousands of his soldiers. 7 humans had reached the command center of his ship, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that they were not here to negotiate. The doors exploded. 7 human soldiers entered. At their center stood the woman who had led the boarding operation. Her name was Captain Ilara Voss. She looked at Kale. "Commander." Kale raised his weapon. Ilara raised hers. Neither fired. "You have 3 minutes," she said. "For what?" "To decide whether you are going to die for an admiral who already lost the war." Kale stared at her. "You think you have won?" "No." Ilara lowered her rifle. "We think the coalition has." Kale looked at the tactical display. The planet was still burning. Ships were still fighting. Millions were still dying. But something had changed. Humanity was no longer trying to survive the invasion. Humanity was trying to end it. Kale lowered his weapon. "Talk." Ilara nodded. "Good." She stepped toward the command table. "The coalition fleet around Nareth is trapped. Your admirals are refusing surrender. Your ground forces are divided. Your own soldiers are abandoning them." She pointed toward the planet. "Human forces control the surface, then toward orbit. We control the orbital supply network, then toward the enemy fleet. And your soldiers have lost the will to continue." Kyle looked at her. "What do you want?" Ilara answered immediately. "An end." Kale stared at her for several seconds. Then the ship shook violently. Everyone looked toward the ceiling. A planetary lance had fired. The southern continent disappeared beneath a column of white fire. Kale's expression changed. The humans had not done that. The coalition had. And now there was no negotiation left. Ilara turned toward the viewport. "Then I guess we are done talking." Kale looked at her. "What happens now?" Ilara raised her rifle. "War." The command deck erupted into chaos. Kyle dove behind the tactical table as plasma bolts filled the air. His remaining officers opened fire. The human soldiers scattered, moving with that same impossible speed and precision Kale had witnessed before. They were not trying to hold the bridge. They were not trying to secure the ship. They were trying to kill everyone who stood against them. Kale watched as his officers fell one by one. The humans were relentless. They moved through the smoke and fire like shadows, appearing and disappearing, their weapons never stopping. Ilara Voss was at the center of it all, directing her team with cold efficiency. She had not come here to talk. She had come here to finish what she started. Kyle raised his weapon and fired. The shot missed. Ilara turned toward him. Their eyes met. Then she was moving toward him, her rifle raised, her expression unreadable. Kyle fired again. The shot struck her shoulder. She stumbled but did not fall. She kept coming. She was going to kill him. He knew it with absolute certainty. Then the ship lurched violently. Everyone stumbled. The lights flickered. The tactical display went dark. A moment later, the emergency alarms began screaming. The ship had taken a direct hit. Somewhere in the distance, Kyle heard explosions. He heard the sound of hull plates tearing apart. He heard screams. Ilara looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at Kale. "This is not over," she said. She turned and ran. Her soldiers followed. They disappeared through the wreckage of the doors. Kyle watched them go. He did not understand. They had been winning. They had been moments away from killing him. Why had they retreated? The answer came a moment later. The ship shook again. The floor tilted beneath him. He grabbed the tactical table to keep from falling. The ship was breaking apart. The human boarding team had not retreated because they were losing. They had retreated because the ship was dying. Kale ran toward the escape pods. Behind him, the command deck collapsed into flames. He reached the pods and slammed the release. The pod launched. He watched the cruiser explode behind him. The shockwave caught the pod and sent it spinning. He lost consciousness. When he woke, he was floating in the blackness of space. His pod was damaged. Its systems were failing. He had no way to contact anyone, no way to navigate, no way to survive. He looked toward Nareth. The planet was still burning. The southern continent was gone. Millions of civilians were dead, and the war was still not over. Kyle closed his eyes. He had come to this world as a conqueror. He had believed in the coalition. He had believed in the mission. He had believed in victory. Now he believed in nothing. Somewhere in the distance he saw movement. A ship, a human ship. It was moving toward him. He did not know if it was coming to rescue him or to kill him. He did not know if it mattered. He only knew that he was alone, floating in the darkness, waiting for whatever came next. On the surface of Nareth, Mara Kess stood in the ruins of her command center. The building was gone. The bunker was gone. Everything she had built was gone, but she was still alive. She looked toward the sky. The coalition fleet was retreating. Her people had won. But the victory felt hollow. 6 million civilians had died in the southern continent. 6 million. She had known it might happen. She had prepared for it. But knowing did not make it any easier to bear. She looked at the officers around her. They were all staring at her, waiting for orders, waiting for direction. Mara took a deep breath. "We are not done," she said. "The coalition will come back. They will send more ships. They will send more soldiers. They will try again. But that is exactly what we need." The officers stared at her. "Why?" She smiled. "Because the more they come, the more they will learn to fear us. And when they fear us enough, they will leave us alone forever." The officers nodded slowly. They did not understand, but they did not need to. They had seen what humans were capable of on this planet. They had seen what they had done to the coalition. They had no doubt that they could do it again. And they knew, deep down, that the coalition had made a terrible mistake. It had invaded a world that wanted nothing but to be left alone. But there was something else. Something beneath the surface. Something that had been sleeping for millions of years. Something that was now beginning to stir. Mara had felt it. She had heard it. She had dreamed about it. And she knew that the war was not over. It had only just begun. The ancient thing beneath Nareth was waking up. And when it woke, everything would change. The final battle began before the smoke from the southern continent had cleared. The air was still thick with ash, and the cries of the dying when every remaining human ship launched from its hidden berths across the planet. They rose from underground hangars, from mountain bunkers, from the depths of oceans that had never been mapped. They rose like a swarm of angry insects, small and seemingly insignificant against the massive coalition dreadnoughts that dominated the sky. But size had never been humanity's advantage, and the coalition was about to learn that lesson one final time. The sky above Nareth became a battlefield of fire. Human fighters attacked in formations so tight that coalition pilots initially believed they were using automated guidance. The patterns were too perfect, the coordination too precise. There was no way organic minds could synchronize their movements with such flawless accuracy. But they weren't using automation. Every maneuver was coordinated by human pilots communicating through systems that had been designed to function even when everything else failed. They had built their networks to survive jamming, electromagnetic pulses, and the chaos of battle. And now, those networks were paying off. Coalition cruisers fired their main cannons. The beams of concentrated energy tore through the void, bright enough to blind anyone who looked directly at them. Human ships broke formation. Missiles passed between them. The fighters scattered in every direction, reforming moments later in positions that should have been impossible. Then the fighters returned. They attacked engines, weapons systems, command bridges. Not the civilian sections, not the escape pods. The humans were destroying the military machine while deliberately avoiding anyone who could no longer fight. Admiral Vorik refused to surrender. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his fleet burn around him, and he refused to accept what was happening. This was not supposed to be possible. The coalition had conquered dozens of civilizations. It had crushed rebellions that spanned entire star systems. It had never lost a war. Never. "Fire everything," he screamed. His flagship unleashed every remaining weapon. The human fleet scattered. Ships exploded on both sides. The void filled with debris and the bodies of the fallen. But the humans kept coming. They had lost so much already. Their planet was burning. Their cities were ruins. Their civilians were dead. There was nothing left to lose except the war itself. And they were not going to lose that. Then Mara Kess gave the final order. Bring them down. The human fleet attacked with a ferocity that stunned even the most experienced coalition officers. Ships that had been holding back, conserving their strength, suddenly threw themselves into the battle with reckless abandon. They did not care about survival. They only cared about victory. One by one, coalition ships lost propulsion. Some attempted to escape. Human fighters disabled them. Some continued firing. Human bombers destroyed them. Vorik watched his fleet disappear from the tactical display, one ship after another. Red symbols vanished. His officers stood frozen, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. "Admiral," the communications officer said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we have received a surrender request." Vorik laughed. "From whom?" The officer swallowed. "Everyone." The admiral stared at the screen. Ground forces, orbital fleets, colonial units, even several high-ranking generals. Everyone was surrendering. Vorik reached for his weapon, then stopped. For the first time, he understood what humanity had done. They had not won because they possessed stronger ships. They had not won because their soldiers were physically superior. They had won because every time the coalition pushed them toward extinction, humanity changed the shape of the war. They had survived the planet, then the invasion, then the blockade, then the orbital assault. And now they had survived the coalition itself. Vorik slowly lowered his weapon, opened the channel. The transmission connected. Mara Kess appeared on the screen. Her face was covered in dust and dried blood. Her eyes were hollow from exhaustion. But there was something else there as well, something that made Vorik's blood run cold. Victory, not the kind that came from defeating an enemy, the kind that came from proving something fundamental about your own existence. The admiral looked at her. "You have won." Mara shook her head. "No." Vorik frowned. "The war is over." "That is not the same thing." She looked toward the burning planet. "You destroyed cities. You killed civilians. You burned an entire continent." Her voice remained calm. "But we are still here." Vorik said nothing. He had no response. Everything he had believed about humanity had been proven wrong. Every assumption he had made had been shattered. And now he was facing the consequences. Mara continued, "And that is the problem you should be afraid of." The admiral stared at her. "What problem?" Mara leaned closer to the camera. "You came to Nareth believing humans were dangerous because we could fight." She paused. "You were wrong." The screen behind her changed. It showed human fleets leaving Nareth. Thousands of ships, not retreating, leaving, heading toward coalition space. Vorik's eyes widened. "You said the war was over." "It is." Mara's expression hardened. "For Nareth." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, alarms began sounding. Coalition command centers received the same message. Human fleets were moving, not toward one planet, toward every world that had supplied the invasion. The coalition had expected revenge. What it had not expected was organization. Humanity had spent years being watched, studied, classified, underestimated. Now they had learned everything they needed to know about the galaxy's military structure. The war on Nareth had been the battle. The next phase would be the war. On the surface of Nareth, Captain Alara Voss stepped out of the ruined command bunker. The sky was dark. Ash fell like snow. Beside her stood Kale Veyran, no longer wearing the insignia of the coalition. He had surrendered hours ago. He had watched his fleet die. He had watched his empire crumble. And now he was standing beside the woman who had destroyed everything he believed in. He looked toward the horizon. "You knew this would happen." Ilara shook her head. "No." She looked at the stars. "We only knew one thing." "What?" Ilara smiled faintly. "Humans don't need to be the strongest species in the galaxy." Kyle looked at her. "Then what do they need?" Ilara watched the first human warships disappear into the clouds. Time. Above them, the fleet engines ignited. Thousands of ships rose from Nareth. The war had begun with an alien empire trying to prove that humanity was weak. It ended with humanity proving something far more frightening. They didn't need to conquer the galaxy. They only needed to survive long enough for the galaxy to give them a reason to fight back. Kale watched the ships disappear into the darkness. He thought about everything he had seen, everything he had learned. The humans had been fighting for their lives, for their homes, for their children. They had not asked for this war. They had not wanted it. But when it came, they had met it with a ferocity that no one in the galaxy could have predicted. He turned to Alara. "What happens now?" Alara looked at him. "Now we finish what we started." She pointed toward the sky. "The coalition is still out there. They still have fleets. They still have worlds. They still have leaders who believe they can win. And you are going to stop them." Alara nodded. "Yes." Kyle looked at her. "How?" Alara smiled. "The same way we stopped them here. We survive. We adapt. We fight. And we never ever give up." Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. He understood. Not everything, not even close, but he understood enough. The humans were not going to stop. They were never going to stop. And that was what made them so terrifying. The war was over for Nareth, but for the rest of the galaxy, it was only beginning. The human fleets were moving. They were heading toward coalition space, toward the worlds that had supplied the invasion, toward the leaders who had ordered the attack, and they were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to end it, once and for all. The ancient thing beneath Nareth stirred. It had been sleeping for millions of years. It had been waiting. And now, with the war over and the planet quiet, it began to wake. Mara Kess felt it. She had always felt it. And she knew that the war was not over. It had only just begun. Because when the ancient thing woke, everything would change.